All right, there we go.
So, my office looks more drab than yours because, like I said, I'm getting over an illness. I'm doing okay. Hopefully, my voice doesn't sound too husky.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
I always feel like my room makes me look like a nerd psychopath at times, so it's perfectly fine to have something a little more austere.
Well, you've got the Thin Man in there, so I think that's fine.
To be fair, that's the Third Man, not the Thin.
Oh, the Third Man. Pardon me. I meant to say the Third Man. The Thin Man's good too, but I think the Third Man is better. Are we doing video or just audio?
Just audio.
Oh, thank God. All right. Because I was like, I wasn't ready for that. I'm literally in my pajamas.
You good?
Yeah, I think so, if you can hear me. And you're just going to record it on your side, right?
Yeah, I started recording, so
okay, great.
We can... All right, welcome to the Groupthink Podcast. Joining us today is Tyler Smith. I can't begin to plug everything he's done, but you can go ahead and just kind of introduce yourself with everything you do.
Sure. Yeah, I co-host a podcast called Battleship Pretension. That's probably my primary claim to fame, to the degree that I am famous, which is not very. I also host More Than One Lesson, which is a film discussion podcast from a Christian perspective. I have a documentary coming out next month, and then I also am an adjunct instructor at a couple of colleges teaching film history and analysis.
That's quite the list. I mean, the first thing I was going to ask was, are there two Tyler Smiths? Because I noticed that there's multiple Tyler Smith accounts floating around online, and I couldn't tell if that was the same Tyler Smith.
I try to make sure that I have a unified presence. So like if you were to go into like the Internet Movie Database and type in Tyler Smith, there's like 1 billion of them. And so anytime I have like a new credit, I try to make sure that it's on the correct account. So it's a bit of a chore sometimes, but so some of the Tyler Smiths that you may have encountered are me. Some of them are probably not. When I have Googled myself, I've discovered a couple of things. One is that there is a Tyler, Texas, located in Smith County. And then I am a somewhat recent graduate of UCLA. I went back to school and got my master's degree. And I'm not even the most famous Tyler Smith to come out of UCLA in the last few years. There's, I believe, a basketball player that does very well. So there are a lot of Tyler Smiths out there, and that's fine with me. There was I was invited to a Facebook group called Tyler Smiths, and it was extended only to people named Tyler Smith. That was the only thing that all of us had in common. I was part of the group for a while, and then I realized, what am I doing? So anyway,
there's something quite nihilistic about that. Just
yeah.
Well, maybe
it's like, do we all just get together and talk about like, hey, how's life been with the name for you? For me, it's been pretty neutral, I'd say, for the most part.
Tyler Smith Anonymous.
Yeah.
I mean,
but you're a fellow Tyler, which is fun.
I'm lucky that Hummel is in no way a popular name. I mean,
sure.
The most people know Hummel either as like the little figurines, or if they know it because there's like some weird eccentric character in a random movie who happens to be named Hummel, like the character from Glee.
Okay.
I mean, but being a millennial and named Tyler is kind of a wonderful curse, because I think at any given point in high school, I was one of maybe 2 to 3 Tylers in the room at once. And we were frequently known to swap seats when there were substitute teachers and just pretend like we were the other Tyler, just because there were so many of us sitting right next to each other.
You should have carried that out and just like lived each other's lives for a while and just kind of had a weird existential crisis. Oddly enough, though I grew up in California, I did not know another Tyler until my family moved to Colorado when I was 10. So I went 10 years, and I was the only Tyler that I knew. Huh. And then at that point, I started to know many Tylers.
Maybe that's an Illinois thing, but I was going to say, Illinois isn't that much more rednecky than California, so I can't really make that claim.
I know, and in Colorado, we moved to Denver, which admittedly it's still Midwest, but yeah. and then I knew several, and then we moved to Missouri, and I knew several more there, and I don't know what it is. And now that I'm back in California, I once again know a couple of Tylers. So it would appear that just for 10 years, for whatever reason, I was just out of the loop.
Well, there you go. So I wanted to have you on at the behest of Esther O'Reilly, who I had on a couple weeks ago, because she kind of spoke well of your credentials as a theologian and as a film analyst.
Well, film analyst maybe, although it's interesting being a film instructor. I need to be careful not to say professor. My students call me Professor Smith. I mean, I tell them to call me Tyler, but they say Professor Smith, and I'm like, you can say Mr. Smith if you want to get formal, but officially I'm not a professor, and I feel like a fraud if you call me that, so please don't. But being an instructor, it's always interesting because, invariably, it's just at a couple of community colleges. It's students taking the class because they think it'll be easy, and I try to make it easy. So they don't necessarily have a passion for film, and so when we talk about movies, there comes a moment, almost invariably, when someone says it's like, wow, have you seen every movie? And it's like, not even close. Like, I haven't even seen the most movies of the people I know. I know people that have seen way more than I have and can think in a much more nuanced way than I do. And so to the degree that I have credentials as a film person, I guess that's certainly more notable than my credentials as a theologian. I'm simply a Christian who I like to think abstractly about my faith, specifically how it relates to art, and I happen to latch on to that at a good time when as Christian film was becoming like a major thing. So it has worked out well for me. I found a niche that I've been able to exploit, I guess.
Well, that's good then. I mean, have you been a lifelong Christian, or is that something that's kind of developed as you gotten older?
I mean, I certainly grew up in the church. My parents are both Christians, and like so many people, I accepted it without thinking about it, and then probably, I accepted it, but if you asked me when I was 10. Like, what does all this mean? I'd be able to say all of this stuff to you, but I don't think I really had a grasp of it. So probably not until I was about 15 or 16 did it become like a very real, tangible thing. And even then, that was 20 plus years ago now. And even then, I still go like up and down as far as between, or I veer between tangible and abstract. It can be frustrating sometimes, but I'm still, yes, at this point, I'm a believing, practicing Christian, and so I'd say I have been officially since I was a teenager.
Well, where do you tend to fall philosophically on that? Are you Catholic, Protestant, Calvinist?
Protestant. I attend a non-denominational church. I grew up in the Nazarene church, which is interesting because I discovered from people later in life that the Nazarene Church is one of the more traditional and conservative churches insofar as like the number of people I know who said, oh yeah, we weren't allowed to watch movies really at all. And I was like, wow, I was super fortunate that I had what I call movie positive parents, because it really, film and art was a big part of my life and a big part of my faith. And so when I discovered that there are people within my own denomination who experienced exactly the opposite, I really feel like I dodged a bullet there. But yeah, I out here we were attending a Presbyterian church for a while, and now it's non-denominational, but pretty traditional Protestant.
That's cool. I've talked to a lot of Christian people in the past year who have said that exact same story, where they say, like, I grew up in this kind of Baptist or ultra traditionalist household, so movies did not exist for us. So it's interesting meeting a lot of people who come into this particular kind of space where people want to start analyzing films from a Christian perspective who come from that background. I mean, obviously, it'd be concerning if I met someone who is like, man, I was never allowed to watch movies as a child because of my Christian parents, but then I discovered Sallow, and it was just all downhill from there. But, I mean, I'm it's interesting meeting a lot of people who have that shared background. I mean, I was kind of that way, just in the sense that my parents were very litigious about what I watched, but they didn't care, but they let me watch as much as I wanted, basically. So it just ended up being this continued cycle of PG rated movies where I was just allowed to watch as much as I wanted, but I just couldn't watch The Simpsons until my dad got home. So I mean, my parents weren't too keen on me watching like rated R movies at a certain age, and then I think, you know, very much to their credit, because this is especially rare. They took who I was into account. They saw that the movies I was interested in at age 15, you know, I was renting Reversal of Fortune with Jeremy Irons about the Klaus von Bülow case, which came out in 1990, officially a rated R movie. And they realized, like, okay, I think he's looking for different things than your standard 15-year-old would when it comes to this sort of thing. 1 second, please. Feel free to vamp. I have to let my cat out of my office. 1 second. He is removing the cat from the office. I can see it. Or I saw it popping around in the footage a couple of times. It's a rather...
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
I saw the cat roaming around in the background, and I was going to point it out, but we were having a decent discussion, so it seemed...
Oh, no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I mean, I've had all too many guests who get interrupted by the cat, so I...
Yeah, and you know what? And I should have known better. Like, I was trying to shoo him out of the office, and then he laid on one of my comfy chairs here, and there are times where he'll lay there for hours, and so I thought, like, okay, he's laying there now, this will probably be okay. Sure enough, 10 minutes in, and he jumps up and decides he doesn't want to... I guess my constant talking is keeping him from sleeping. So, anyway, sorry about that. Yes.
Well, there you go. I mean, maybe.
Have you ever seen Reversal of Fortune?
I have not. I think that
it's so good.
That was a little before my time. I was born in 1995, so stuff that's. I have yet to catch up on a lot of movies pre-2012 beyond like going back and watching the obvious classics. Like,
Okay.
That's a sin I face all the time where I tend to be that guy who watches the movies for a lot of people, and then they'll jump at me with something they think is obvious and being like, "Have you seen like Christmas Vacation or the third Vacation movie?" And I'm sitting here like, "No, I haven't seen the third Vacation movie because I was a zygote at the time, so I'm sorry." But and then they're like, "Wow, you need to go back and watch the classics, so you can't call yourself a movie nerd."
Well. Okay, on one hand, I see where they're coming from. On the other, I got over that attitude a long time ago. Because invariably, the person's like, you should see this movie that I saw. And then you can call yourself a movie nerd. Meanwhile, that person probably has a huge blind spot that a deeper movie nerd, like, it's just this constant, peeing contest. Sorry, I was gonna say something. Anyway, it's just
you wouldn't be the first person to swear on this podcast.
Okay, all right.
I'll forgive you.
Okay. Well, there are multiple layers of me censoring myself there, because initially it was I was gonna say a blank measuring contest, and I was like, no, I should say it should be a piss. No, can't say that. It's like, okay, so I had to change it all very quickly.
I am shocked to hear there is swearing going on in this establishment, good sir.
I know, and look at you referencing a film from 1942.
The best quote from that movie, though. So the best understated quote. The best singular quote, I'd say that's true, because it can exist sort of on its own. But I'm a big fan of all of the interactions between Peter Lorre and Humphrey Bogart. When Peter Lorre says, "You despise me, don't you, Rick?" And he says, "If I gave you any thought, I would." And it's like, oh, that's horrible. Like, he could have just said yes and it would have been bad enough, but no, he had to like make it even worse. So it's Thanos saying, "I don't even know who you are."
But yeah, no, that's the thing is everybody, so okay, you're born in 95, you said?
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. Mathematically, that makes you 25.
Yes.
Right? Okay. So, when I was 25, which at this point was a while ago, yeah, I mean, there was stuff that I'd seen and stuff I hadn't. There were entire genres that I hadn't really engaged with, films from, like, countries that I hadn't really engaged with, and so, like, it's perfectly fine, and now I'm almost 38, and there's still so many things I haven't seen, but to, like, try to shame you for having not... I know that's not what they're actually doing. They're actually trying to make themselves sound better, well, but yeah. It's the aspect of film nerdery that I have no patience for, where it's like, oh, well, you can't talk unless you've seen this movie, or you can't... It's like, oh, you don't know this random trivia? Oh, you got the year wrong? Because immediately just now, I said Casablanca was 42, but I wasn't sure if it's 42 or 43. So, like, it gets boiled down to, what have you... Like, checking stuff off a list, and do you know the trivia? Actually engaging with a movie on an artistic level is something that I feel like even nerds may not always do, because that is not quite so measurable as knowing trivia. That has a clear answer, whereas talking about, well, what are these movies actually about, like, underneath? So yeah, that's something that I've come to realize over time, because I think I very much used to be that, and then you come to realize that art is so much more exciting than just you saw it and that's the end of it. It's why both the book and the movie of Ready Player One make me almost physically nauseous, because the whole character wasn't James Halliday, the guy who set up the Oasis, and so like, oh, there's this 80s pop culture, and if you can say the entire script, was it War Games or something like that? Like, if you can say the entire script of War Games verbatim, then you win this prize. And it's like, and it's a character who ostensibly loves this stuff. It's like, I don't know how much you love it. It's like, I could list off a lot of facts about my wife for you, but that's not really the same as me knowing her, or loving her. It's me obsessing over her, but that's a very different thing. But anyway, sorry, I got up on my high horse there. I apologize.
No, you're jumping around a bunch of stuff I want to talk about, but I mean, I have the same exact attitude towards Ready Player One, where I think that whole book and the film are setting up an ending that's much more serious and grounded and responsible than any of the characters or people or individuals living in that world, and it ultimately doesn't really live up to it. Like, they literally go to the world, and there's a giant self-destruct button that will destroy the internet, and they're just like, don't touch it.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what the subtext of the novel was building up to, touching the button that will blow up the internet, because that entire obsessive culture is just choking out this world, and I mean, the Spielberg version's a little better in that sense, because they're like, oh, it'll take 2 days a week off from the internet. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's moderately better, but it's still culpable and everything. But
I feel like that book was written to be a movie, because it's engaging with so much visual stuff, whether it be video games or movies or TV, that it's just going to translate so much better to film. And I think Spielberg, I don't like the movie. I certainly don't think it's very engaging, but Spielberg does have a visual sense. He has a strong sense of timing, and I think he actually just decided, like, hey, I know it's not really in the book, but can we do an entire tribute to Stanley Kubrick? Yes? Okay, I'm doing it. And so I definitely think he made the film as palatable as it could be. Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah.
What a waste.
I hate the attitude that book and the film kind of represent, like you were talking about, whereas film criticism just turns into the loudest voices nitpicking something to death. And you see that so much with millennial film critics. There's so much bad armchair film criticism out there. And the sad part is that those people make a lot of money doing it. And
yep. The last essay, no, it wasn't the last, the second to last essay that I wrote when I was getting my master's was something that I called the vulgarization of modern film criticism. And in this case, I use vulgar in every definition, which is to say vulgar can mean common. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with like the democratization of the internet because it allows everyone to have a voice, and you never know when someone could have a unique interpretation or a unique insight on a film. That's what's so exciting about the internet. But I do think that that it also allows just anyone who has seen 8 more movies than their friends have. They're like, you know what, I'm kind of the movie guy. I think I've got a take. And then they put themselves out there, and then they realize like, oh well, you know what? To get clicks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to heighten my tone and dumb down my rhetoric, and that way people will enjoy it. And that's where you get like often a different type of vulgarization. Not that I'm opposed to vulgarity as a concept, but that it definitely changes it changes the conversation, makes it, on one hand, more accessible. I like to view those types of critics as like they're good gateway critics, and you hope that people that are listening to them start to develop a taste for something deeper, and then they go elsewhere. But I don't think that happens. I'm a big fan of Red Letter Media, and they know where the money comes from, and they know that that their fans are mostly genre people, and so I have come to understand that, and I often value their opinion because they are able to think a little bit outside of the geek bubble. But every once in a while, they'll like they were talking about Star Wars, and they referenced Marriage Story, and they said that they saw Marriage Story, and they were talking about Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson, and then they moved on, and I was like, I really wish you did a whole episode about Marriage Story, but I recognized that it wouldn't get the views, and that's the problem, is that like vulgar film criticism and common film criticism, very broad film criticism, that's what gets the views, because that's the stuff that engages the most with mainstream culture, and that's what people are most likely to see. I think the age of the film critic as like the person that you read to determine whether or not you are going to see a movie, I think that's done. Now I think it's you see the movie and then you go to the film critics to see what their take was, and then you find the ones you like and the ones you don't, which I'm fine with, but it definitely requires that they fill a different role in somebody's life.
I mean, what I like about Red Letter Media is that there's the underlying satire of their bit is that they're all hacks, and that they're all
sure.
They kind of own the fact that what they're doing is frivolous, and it just happens to be an incredibly fruitful enterprise. Which the problem is, so many people on the internet don't realize that. Like, one of those horrible statistics that like there are more millennials that want to be YouTube famous than want to go to the moon or something like that, and I'm like, If you aren't self-aware of the fact that the thing you're doing is essentially useless from a societal standpoint, then you're not helping, because movies are supposed to be something that makes your life better marginally, and they've become kind of this huge societal crux because they're the one thing that everyone, regardless of their culture, relates over. We don't have in America, we don't have a common faith or a common set of political ideologies anymore.
Yeah.
We just all that we have in common is that everyone and their mother went and saw Endgame last year. So
right. It's like, there's a new season of Stranger Things. Here we go.
These things become religious artifacts in and of themselves, as opposed, the audiences tend to reward the ones that say the least and the ones that ultimately say the least controversial things, which is frustrating because as people who care about the art form, you want something like The Irishman, or you want something like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood to go out there and become the biggest thing that year. But it ends up going. I mean, not to say there's anything wrong with Endgame or Star Wars. I love all of that, but it becomes an idol in and of itself, and I think that's not good. And it's especially to my generation. I don't know if we're the same generation or not, but
so I don't. I mean, some people have said that I'm a millennial. I'm like right on the cusp. But that's the thing, is I'm not Gen X either, and so then I've actually read articles that said that there's something called like the Zennials or the Xennials or whatever, and it's like a 6-year period where it's like someone who can't quite relate to Gen X, but can't quite relate to millennials either. And it's like between 77 and 83 or something like that. And I'm 82. And it's like people who weren't raised with computers, but they were young enough that they were able to adapt to them. And I was like, okay, that's me. But anyway, yeah. So so this is not a thing I necessarily put out super publicly because I try to keep everything separate. But I've been writing articles for the Daily Wire, and
hey, I got one published there earlier last month. So
yeah, so I just posted, I think, my 6th or 7th, I don't remember. And one of the articles that I published a review of Rise of Skywalker, and then shortly thereafter I posted a lengthy article defending The Last Jedi, which of course is well, you just can't do that. Yeah, I see the poster there. I liked The Last Jedi quite a bit. Not perfect. That Monte Carlo stuff could probably be dropped, especially when you've got a ticking clock element. But I really like what they do with Rey, and I really like what they do with Luke and Kylo Ren. I think there's some great stuff in there. But like of all of the reactions to my articles, and the vast majority of them are negative anyway, which I expected. But this one, I wrote it knowing full it's like there's not going to be an ounce of positivity in the response to this. And sure enough, I was right. There are people that looked at it first politically, and so they can't let anything. They can't give anything a slightly positive response. But then there are people that were like hardcore Star Wars people, and they said well, you just don't understand Star Wars, and it's interesting because I guess on one hand maybe I don't because I'm not as hardcore Star Wars fan, but what I wanted to say and then didn't because there are times where I will respond to comments, but I try to only respond to like positive comments. So so that we're having like, hey, you like this movie? I like this one. Let's watch movies. That kind of thing. But what I want to say, and this is where I could sound a little bit elitist, when someone says well, you just don't understand Star Wars. I find myself wanting to say, well, you don't understand movies. Like, you're right, I don't understand Star Wars. I understand film. Not just, and you are so concentrated on this one thing, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but you're so concentrated on it that you're not thinking about larger iconography. Like, Last Jedi is a very iconic film. Like, you look at, Rian Johnson just creates these really beautiful and fascinating tableaus, I find myself thinking back to the visual aspect of that film, along with the ways that he quote unquote subverted expectations, which people get sarcastic about. They're like, oh, he did that. The Red Letter Media guys say that. And it's like, well, no, it's not a good in and of itself, but when that subversion actually deepens the themes of the film, I'm all for it. But that's the thing, is people just can't. They get so into the mythology of the film and of the world that themes are secondary, if not completely tertiary. So yeah, it's I don't remember how we got on this. Sorry about that.
No. I mean, it kind of relates to the topic, as there are a lot of those people on YouTube that do like the 5-hour reviews of why The Last Jedi ruined Star Wars.
Yeah.
Hold on, I didn't do it right. Why The Last Jedi ruined Star Wars forever. I mean,
there is one there's one channel that I can't even say the name of here because it has a swear word in the name of the channel. It's very popular, and it talks about it primarily talks about Hollywood shooting itself in the foot because it's trying to be too woke and that sort of thing. It's like, look, I'm a conservative. I don't have a whole lot of patience for that stuff, but at the same time, I tend to be a movie guy first, and if somebody feels that they want to do something, then I'm going to let them, and if it's effective, great. If it's not, so be it. I thought Captain Marvel was not very good, but I thought Wonder Woman was great. And both of them have female superheroes, and that choice could be seen by some as just, oh, well, it's just such a woke choice. And like, yeah, maybe it is, but then what are they going to do with it? That's my question. But yeah, and so there's not a lot of stuff I hate watch, but that channel I will hate watch because the guy is just so smug, and his voice, if it's possible to have a punchable voice, he's got it. And just it's hard to explain, and it probably, if you were to employ that voice in a different way, maybe it wouldn't be so bad. But there's just it's that voice combined with the smug attitude. No thank you. I say no thank you, but I give them a lot of clicks.
I mean, I could just go off on a lot of those guys for a while, just because I find them... I mean, I don't want to name names, but I find a lot of that kind of style of channel to be radically anti-intellectual and radically unwilling to actually engage with what the film is saying in any meaningful sense. It turns into a version of Cinema Sins for over the course of hours at a time, and I'm like, I can understand having a viscerally negative reaction to a movie like The Last Jedi, because that movie has a lot of things that you're supposed to have viscerally negative reactions to in it as part of the design. But it's worth at least putting yourself in the perspective of the director and being like, what is it trying to say? What is it trying to mean? Why do they do this? Why did they do that? Instead, it's just like, oh, Rian Johnson hates Star Wars, and he wants all of the fans to feel like they should be bad for liking Star Wars or something like that. And I'm like...
Yeah, it's like you don't have to be binary in this instance, you know? Like, he wants people to rethink Star Wars. He wants to redefine Star Wars a little bit. That doesn't mean that he hates it. Like, look, I recognize that as it's often conservatives that I don't mean to rail against conservatives. I'm a conservative, but like, you know, hey, I get it. Barack Obama said we are 5 days away from fundamentally changing this country and all that sort of thing, and so we view like the idea of rethinking or retooling something as an inherent condemnation of it, and that's the problem. Is that like, when you're dealing with art, it's you can't approach it like anything else in your life. You know, the editor over at Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro, he likes to say facts don't care about your feelings, and I agree. Art, however, cares very much about your feelings, like a lot, and so it's just not quantifiable. And so if it's looking to engage, because it's done by another person, and so it has a point of view, and it wants you to engage with that point of view. And I think a lot of people, to get away from politics, I think a lot of people in general are unwilling to engage with that point of view. They just see, like, does this point of view agree with me, whether it be politically, religiously, or mythologically, in the case of something like Star Wars. Does this fit with what I have determined this should be? And and I think it keeps people from really engaging with some amazing art.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm looking at The Last Jedi specifically, the worst thing I can say about my thoughts on that film ultimately is that if you take the film purely for its themes, the movie is essentially making an argument that in the post-Christian world, the way you mobilize people is through political radicalization. Which I don't know if that's a completely off read on it, because, I mean, obviously it's a movie about the death of a foundational religion and the formation of an ideology and its aftermath. Yeah. But, like, I think there's a case that movie could be, like, read as, like, a straight-up Antifa film, or, like, a communist movie that's about the death of religion and the birth of a new post-corporate ideology or something like that. But that's not the most important thing for the film, because it's ultimately a film that's way more interested in its characters than it is about the world around them, which is a flaw of the new trilogy as a whole. But
I definitely got that sense from it, but I also I do feel like it's a situation where it's Rian Johnson. Again, he's not trying to condemn Star Wars or Star Wars fans. He's trying to get them to think more abstractly outside of the concept of canon. And so, the idea of burning the sacred text, I can't tell you how many times I've been arguing with someone about Last Jedi, and they bring up the books. And it's just like, the books aren't, first off, the books aren't movies. Movies exist separately than the books. But, like, they're like, oh, well, this, the books were, like, these books were better, and they explored the mythology so much more. It's like, well, I think that could be seen as, like, the Jedi text could very well be seen as just not merely the actual, like, Star Wars books, but just the concept of this is how things are. And yeah, they don't have to be that, in the same way when someone says like, that's not what Star Wars is in regards to Last Jedi. My response has been, well, it is now. See, it's right there. But people just refuse to, and we all have properties that we're close to. I myself am a big fan of the Riddler as a character. I above my computer right now, I'm looking at probably about 70 figurines and action figures and that sort of thing. If this were video, I would grab one and hold it up to the camera. But and it bothered me what the show Gotham started to do with the Riddler. But my reason for that was that they essentially gave him, like, a split personality, and my whole thought was, like, you already have a split personality character in this universe, which is Harvey Dent, and you've already introduced him. Why are you employing this with a different character? And I think just came down to, like, lazy writing and not knowing how to turn Riddler from a good guy into a bad guy. But anyway, but yeah, that's the thing, is I like the way you're thinking in regards to Last Jedi, because Rian Johnson is a sensitive enough director and writer, and he thinks in a complex enough way that, yeah, I think he could absolutely take something like Star Wars, the property of Star Wars. I mean, we're dealing with the Force, we're dealing with Jedi who are monks and they have a belief system and all that, and he could use all of that as a symbol for, like you said, a post-Christian world, and, like, well, we have to kind of make our own way, and the old rules don't apply anymore, and that sort of thing. And so yeah, I certainly, the number of times that I've interpreted something a certain way and people say, I think you're reaching, has sort of caused me to never accuse anybody else of that, because I think it fits. I think it 100% fits within that stencil thematically. So I think you're definitely onto something.
I think it's, from what I can tell about him as a guy, I think that kind of fits too, because I was talking to Hannah Long a couple weeks ago, and she pointed out that Rian Johnson was I think his father's, like, a pastor or something. Like, he's a deconvert. So it would not surprise me if he's if he's the kind of guy who, like, moves to the city as an adult and becomes, like, a twee hipster who's, like,
sure,
very casually anti-religious in a very subtle way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm a big fan of the movie Knives Out. I don't know if you saw it or not.
I did, yeah.
But and I really adore what he's doing with it, but I also feel like, and incidentally, my Battleship Pretension co-host, who is the exact opposite of me in many ways, he's the very liberal atheist, and I'm a conservative Christian, and even he goes, either have more politics in it or none. Like, the amount that you have in there just sprinkled in for good measure is like, I can't do anything with that. Like, you're perfect. I'm perfectly fine with a movie that just infuses politics into its system. I can either reject or accept them. That's fine. But just, like, it just felt like he didn't know what to do with it. It's like, well, I'm telling a story about rich people, so I guess I should have something in here, right? It's like, you don't have to if you don't want to. You don't owe me anything. Just be true to yourself and your characters. It's fine.
I mean, with Knives Out, I think there's, like, a really radical read you can read into it, where, I mean, one of my favorite film critics is one of the most progressive film critics out there, Devin Faraci. I don't know if you've heard of him.
I know Devin, yeah.
Yeah, he still writes his own blog ever since he got Me Too'd out of Birth Movies Death. And he wrote about Knives Out, and he kind of read it as, like, a movie about some sort of like vaguely about demographic replacement. And
yeah, I definitely saw it. Certainly that last image is that.
There's like a creepy alt-righty kind of read on it, where the movie is about like, oh, the rich people are gonna get replaced. I'm like, no, I don't like that read. But I mean, it's one of those things where if I had like a radical brain like a Devin Faraci or like someone like that who you have that kind of just read on life. I mean, yeah, I could definitely see this movie having a much more potent agenda, but the movie is definitely kind of riding a wire between saying something really radical and just kind of keeping plates in the air and making it twee and fun and not complicated.
Yeah, I think I could definitely see his read, and that did occur to me, the idea of like, you know, this isn't the nation that it used to be, and that sort of thing, and these characters kind of deserve what they're getting. You know, they get what they deserve, as Joker would say, and so, but at the same time, it makes for narratively, it just makes for a nice reversal. Like most of in movies that have sort of a political or frankly a spiritual agenda, the most effective ones are the ones that make it work organically in from a narrative standpoint, so that it's just as satisfying that way as it would be if you are 100% tuned into its themes and symbolism and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was just listening to Sonny Bunch's podcast about Knives Out a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about the fact that he thought the movie went way too political, in the sense that its basic assumptions about people kind of drowned out a lot of potential depth that the characters could have. Like the I forget the name of the main woman, I think the Brazilian woman, I forget her name.
Oh, the actress is, I don't remember the name of the character, but it's Ana de Armas.
Yeah, she's amazing in the film, but
I love her in that. Yeah,
Sonny was pointing out, like, the movie treats her like she's an absolute angel that doesn't do anything wrong, doesn't have anything like wrong about her. The only thing that's at all like a flaw at all is that she just so happens to have a mother who's an illegal immigrant. And you could say that's kind of a base assumption from Rian Johnson, where it comes from his perspective on life. But so I would say in a lot of ways the movie has a lot more progressive assumptions or progressive, like, unstated politics than actual stated politics in a way.
Yeah. What's interesting is they make the character so occasionally wacky because the film is very comedic, and I like that with a character like that, it'd be so easy to make her just like essentially the straight man, like where she's just so noble and pure that she does no wrong. But I don't think that's what he does. Like she has so many great takes, not necessarily to the camera, but just and she's so physically amusing that it's hard for me to see her as this somehow holier than thou or this pure soul. She's just constant, like she's barely holding anything together, you know. And the film is arguing that like she's just trying to be a decent person, and compared with some of the people around her, she's the closest any of those people can come. And you know, like the moment she makes, that's the other thing, is she makes so many mistakes. Like she doesn't, like she's not good at this sort of thing. And so there's one or two moments where she's like, she's sort of figured out what to do, and she's sort of a step ahead of our villain, but that's only towards the end, implying that she has sort of learned how to do this. But yeah, it's I really like that character, and I think her performance is a big part of why she works. Because I think a less capable actress would not have been able to hold her own against that ensemble, and I think she absolutely does.
Sure.
But I loved her in Blade Runner. I thought she did a great job in Blade Runner as well.
Oh, I didn't realize. I didn't put the two and two together. That was the girl from Blade Runner. That's cool.
Yeah, she was great in that.
Well, there you go. So I guess the topic for this podcast, which we've managed to avoid for a while. I wanted to kind of converse a little about the nature of, or about the relationship between film and society, because obviously something I'm sure we both kind of wrestle with a lot is the degree, how a Christian should go about maneuvering in such a secular film culture. I mean, I meet
Yeah.
so many Christians that take the I'm going to back out and watch nothing but Turner Classic Movies and Pure Flix route. But
Yep.
I mean, obviously, part of my own film identity has been based in kind of, well, it's like you said, I'm a film guy first, as much as I'm also a practicing Christian, which obviously I'm trying to be a better Christian, not just film should not be above God, but
Right.
trying to live within the bounds of a world where where most great film is not religious in nature, but still trying to find the religious themes in it or the religious angle on it. Where do you sit on how a Christian should engage in that kind of culture?
Well, I mean, obviously it's different for everybody because everybody has different convictions. But for myself, I felt God leading me towards a life of film criticism in some capacity about 12 years ago. And as a result, with a few exceptions here and there, I try to see as much as I can. There are some movies that I haven't seen, and it's based on what I've heard people say. My go-to is there was a movie that came out a few years ago called Blue is the Warmest Color, which was considered a really wonderful movie. And I'm sure on some level I probably would have liked it, but it's a lesbian love story, and many of the same people that still love the movie said that the sexuality made them uncomfortable, that the way the camera lingers on these two women during like moments of nudity or sexuality, like even the film's boosters said like it made them feel gross. It made them feel like the director was like, all right, here we go, we're making art, and so part of me is like, okay, so you've got this movie that is beautiful, but that is, visually gorgeous and narratively interesting and beautifully acted and all of that. But even the film's like most ardent supporters acknowledge that there is a pretty heavy element of exploitation in there. And so part of me is like, okay, well, I know the stuff that I struggle with as a Christian and as a man. So I think I'm going to avoid this. There are plenty of movies I've seen that do have sexuality in them and have nudity in them, but I don't think that they're exploitive. I think they're actually trying to engage in a certain degree of vulnerability and that sort of thing. And so it really just has to do with discernment and a certain degree of research, and quite a bit of self-knowledge. Because I think so much of it boils down to content, but content can also mean philosophy. There are movies that are just so nihilistic, and because I'm somebody who struggles with depression and a general sense of hopelessness and that sort of thing, like I try to be careful about seeing movies that are overly nihilistic. I still see some of them, and I'm also a big fan of film noir, so there's going to be a lot of fatalism there. But yeah, I think you first have to be very aware of who you are and where your stumbling blocks are, but then you also need to understand where God is taking you. I remember I've only seen one episode of Game of Thrones. I watched it with my wife, and she's like, I don't know if I like the idea of you watching this show. And the first episode had a lot of nudity in it, and most of it felt unnecessary, and that is not a tangible thing. You can't like time it out. Most of it seemed unnecessary, but there was one scene where I was like, I think this is necessary, because it was all about vulnerability and purity and a character feeling alone and that sort of thing, and exposed. And so I was talking with my wife. She's like, and I said, yeah, apparently the whole show, at least for the first few seasons, is this. She's like, ugh. She's like, if it were a movie, I'd say you have to watch it. She's like, but it's a TV show. So do you think you could skip it? I'm like, gladly, no problem. Because along with sexuality that I've heard, again, according to some, is a little bit exploitative, I also have heard about like some of the darker story elements just through cultural osmosis, and it just sounds like something that could get to me emotionally. And so, but it's a TV show. It's like, I've not been called to be a TV critic. So if I were, then yes, you need to watch Game of Thrones, but I'm not, so I don't have to. And so I do think that there is a tendency amongst people like you and I, who feel like, oh, well, I should watch everything. And I don't think that's a bad instinct, but I also think like it's possible to be undiscerning on multiple levels. One is to not see anything, and one is to see everything. Something that I have said on my podcast is that extremes are easy. They may be hard to implement, but philosophically they're easy. You can be like, I now know that I'm not doing this, or I am doing that. It's like, well, sometimes you have to operate in the middle ground, which means you have to take it on a case-by-case basis, which is hard to do, but it can be much more rewarding. But as far as approaching films that would seem to have nothing to say spiritually, I do agree with kind of the C.S. Lewis way of thinking, which is all art, all sincere art, is at its core a search for truth with a lowercase t, and a person can only do that for so long before encountering, if only for a moment, truth with an uppercase T. And it's in that brief encounter that I'm at my most intrigued. Because, yeah, there are times I've seen movies that I'm sure the director actively is not trying to do anything related to Christianity. But they are sincerely trying to explore something. And they want to try and get to the core of it. They want to try and get to the truth of it. And just for a moment, it's like, oh, I see God here. I don't think the director does. But I'm glad the director was willing to follow where the project was going. And so I do think that God can be found in any number of things, even if the director, him or herself, is not trying to look for him actively.
Well, I think that's the thesis of my entire Flawed Faith series at Geeks Under Grace. My problem ultimately is a question of how is this going to reflect on the final analysis? Because there are essays I've written for Geeks Under Grace. The best, I'll say this: the best thing I love about Geeks Under Grace is that they almost never say no to my ideas. They
okay.
But I'm always afraid that I'm going to ultimately step on something theologically that I shouldn't be stepping on, or going too far outside where I should be. I mean, like, I'm always afraid, like, someday I'm gonna get to heaven, and then God's gonna open the book and it said, well, you watched all of these movies, and it's like explain yourself. Why? Like, I'll be like, I'm not gonna have a good answer. I mean, I suggested a couple of the articles I wanted you to check out. Like, I did an article. I think the only article I've ever written that got any amount of like negative visceral feedback was the one in which I defended The Last Temptation of Christ. And
yeah.
And it wasn't even like a theological answer. It was just a professor from my old college who was religious who said that that defending that movie was wrong. And I'm just sitting, and I was sitting here like, I want to know why someone like Martin Scorsese would make a biopic or a Jesus film like that, more so than I am interested in how honest this is a depiction of the New Testament.
Yeah, I would say, I don't mean to cast aspersions on other professors, but it sounds like that professor is an imbecile. And I've run across this quite a bit, specifically with Last Temptation. And one thing that I really like is that Scorsese specifies at the beginning of the film that, like, this is not a clear-cut adaptation of the Bible. It is an adaptation of this other book. And I'm going to be true to that. And so, like, he's giving you permission to not see this as any kind of definitive portrayal of Jesus. It is this might be a little bit too casual of a term, it's a riff on Jesus. So that maybe the author of the book and Scorsese himself, or us, the viewers, can get a different side of Jesus that might be able to enable us to have a deeper understanding of the actual Jesus. Like, we often, understandably, when we talk about Jesus being God and man. Well, we talk about the God stuff a lot, which admittedly is what makes him different. But in doing so, I think we don't talk much about him being a man and what that would look like. And it also brings up the nature of what is temptation as opposed to action. You know, the idea of him looking at Mary Magdalene and saying, like, this is a thing I want. Is that a temptation, or is that full on lust? And then the temptation at the last temptation at the end of the film. So many people, they hear, oh, there's a scene where Jesus has sex with Mary Magdalene. It's like, the temptation is so much deeper than that. It's not a lust filled, it's the temptation to give into his human side and just live that out. And I was so happy that they play it out, because we get so focused on the pain of the torture and the cross, and understandably so. But what we don't talk about very much is what he gave up. He gave up a full life, a life that we ourselves have every expectation of living. We, especially as Christians, we have sort of we've got a path laid out for us, for the most part, culturally, which is you become Christian, you get a job, you get married, you have children, your children have children, you have grandchildren, and then you retire and you die of old age. All of that, short of a career, was given up by Jesus. All right. And meanwhile, that is our definition of success as Americans and as Westerners. And that is our definition of a good life. And so by showing us the life that Jesus could have lived, and yes, that does include having sex with his wife, having that level of physical and emotional intimacy with another person. That's another thing he gave up. And so for people to zero in on just these small things, it's like, you are not engaging with the film the way it absolutely deserves to be engaged with. I came away from The Passion of the Christ feeling like I had just watched a bunch of bad stuff happen to a stranger. And it's like, well, I'm pretty sure the stranger doesn't deserve this, but nonetheless, I don't know who he is. And I'm somebody who believes he does know Jesus. I watched Last Temptation of Christ, and that is a Jesus that I get to know over the course of the film. We hear his inner thoughts. We see his doubts, if you can call him that. We see his very human resistance. You know, if anybody started to get this feeling like, hey, you're God, that person, if they were sane at all, would say, I don't think I am. I think maybe I'm losing my mind. And like, it's exploring the human side, and at no point is Scorsese saying this was actually Jesus. It's like, no, this is a version of Jesus that allows us to relate to him in a way that we really can't in other media. And so I really love it. I felt closer to Jesus, and the fact that he eventually he sees that, as you mentioned in your article, he comes to realize the necessity in this world for the kind of hope that Jesus brings. You know, Harry Dean Stanton playing Paul in that wonderful scene, he goes, oh, when he discovers that, oh, Jesus is standing in front of me and he didn't die for people's sins, he goes, they don't need you. They need Jesus. They need God. They need this level of connection and hope. You have no idea how much people need this stuff. And so, like, wouldn't it be nice if it were right? This guy's going to say it anyway. Wouldn't it be nice if it were true? And so Jesus finally decides, no, this is this full life is all well and good, but it doesn't help anybody. So I do want to be the Messiah. And sure enough, he's back on the cross. He has resisted that temptation. And he ends with, it is accomplished. And then this wonderful triumphant music by Peter Gabriel comes in, and it is treated as not a downbeat ending, but the happiest of endings, the most joyful of endings. And so to me, it's like, this doesn't undercut the Jesus I know. It allows me to fictionalize him for a moment so that I can have a slightly deeper understanding of who he might have been emotionally, so that I can connect with him and be so much more grateful for his sacrifice. And for somebody to discard the film completely is, I think, to limit God's ability to use sincere art to speak to people, because he spoke to me like a lot when I first saw that movie, and every time I've watched it since. Like, it is one of my favorite. It is my favorite Scorsese movie, and it's one of my favorite movies of all time. And so I watched it with a group of friends. It was my second time seeing it. I watched it with a group of friends. Many of them were frustrated by it. A group of Christian friends. Many of them were frustrated by it, and that's fine. But to simply say this movie shouldn't be defended, it's like, no, I'm not putting art first when I say that it should be defended. We should always try to see the point of view of somebody else. If, like, this is not a film that I think is meant to undercut Jesus at all. It is a very sincere attempt to engage with him. And if that's what they're doing, then it should be defended to the degree that it can be. And if it comes up as theologically unsound, then we should say that. But extending it every courtesy from an analysis standpoint, I think is our responsibility as Christian critics and people who want to engage with art in any kind of real way.
Do you think there's a line that can be crossed, that the thing becomes objectively too far to defend? Like, there are films I've wanted to challenge myself and try to make that same case for, like something like Life of Brian, where I haven't quite found like a way to tackle it in any sort of way that I think is in a way that shows the Christian life despite what the artist is saying.
And that to me is like, Life of Brian is much more generally about religion than it is about Jesus specifically. Like, it goes out of its way to show that here's Jesus over here, but that's not who we're going to be focusing on. We're going to be focusing on Brian. And to me, Life of Brian is all about that thing that I was talking about with Paul in Last Temptation of Christ, which is like, people are so eager, sometimes blindly so. People are so eager for some kind of answer that they will find that if no answer is provided to them, they will find it themselves even a character who is reluctant, like Brian is. And so as a Christian, I look at that, I'm like, okay, well, it seems to me that I have a responsibility to provide people with what I believe to be the actual truth that provides actual hope, and not so that people don't, because people are going to, Bob Dylan said you're going to have to serve somebody, and like, people are going to serve someone. So like, I feel like I have a responsibility to show them the correct entity to serve, because I think what Life of Brian says is that they'll find someone. And so I don't think this is actively the point that it's making as like a call to action for me, but it's saying like, they're going to serve someone. And so there are going to be a lot of con artists out there, and Brian isn't even a con artist. He's just doesn't want any part of this. So yeah, even something like Life of Brian, I look at and I find it often very amusing. But I also see it as like, yeah, it is one of the reasons that it's darkly funny is because I think it acknowledges a very true aspect of human nature. And that is the aspect that means that I need to get to work as a Christian. I can't be bashful about my faith, because the people that would look to exploit are not. They are not bashful about their quote-unquote faith. They will say it loud and proud. And so if I'm like worried about sparing people's feelings or worrying what people will think of me, which is a constant concern of mine, then I'm not going to prevail in this situation. So that's one of the things that I get out of Life of Brian. I do think there's probably a line, anything that portrays, that just completely capitalizes on the idea of Jesus or the character of Jesus and just undercuts his nature, makes him out to be some kind of lustful sinner who just gave into it constantly, and that he wasn't part God, or that or it paints God as the villain and Jesus is like the cool guy. It's like, okay, now we're delving into actual biblical inaccuracy and something that is maybe a little bit contemptuous of the Bible. And in that instance, I tend to argue that like that art has every right to exist, but maybe it's saying something much deeper than I think. In which case, I will read other critics and see what they say. But if they come away just feeling like, this is so irreverent, and that's it, then it's like, yeah, that's not a thing I necessarily need to watch. But I usually err on this. Me personally, I err on the side. Oh, I just said me personally. Ugh. That's what the Red Letter Media guys make fun of about Collider. But anyway, for myself personally, I tend to err on the side of watch it, engage with it, and then if there's something to be gotten out of it, great. If there isn't, then you can just go ahead and dismiss it. But at least you gave it a shot.
Well, there you go. You've written my Life of Brian piece for me, but.
Oh, okay. I'm glad I could help.
That would be direct piracy. So, I mean, obviously, in that case, the more damaging thing I could probably be doing would be to like write something that's casually off in my theology. Although I don't know if I've ever gotten that far yet. I mean, I did just do a piece on Ben Solo in The Rise of Skywalker, and I unintentionally caused a widespread disagreement between an Orthodox theologian and then myself and about 3 other people, because apparently Orthodox Christians have a very different understanding of the nature of salvation, and I was interpreting it from a mildly Calvinist perspective, and it turned into a massive theological dust-up over to what degree humans are deprived and to what degree we have access to salvation. Obviously, stuff like that you can go into the weeds on. But I'm always very nervous when I'm writing that I'm going to say something that's theologically unsound or theologically shallow. Because, I mean, obviously, if my goal is to try to defend art that's not being acknowledged well by Christian movie fans, you have to get to the reason why it's not being acknowledged well and cut through that in a way that's understandable. Like, obviously, with the Last Temptation of Christ, but getting caught in the weeds of theology tends to be something I'm also concerned about. What pieces did you end up reading from what I published?
Let's see. I read Last Temptation. I read Silence. Excuse me. Excuse me. I read It's a Wonderful Life, and then, gosh, it was like a month ago. Like, I read the 3 that you, like, last night you said, like, oh, you should read these, and I think 2 of them I had read already. So I've read 4 total, and now I don't remember what the last one was.
Was it the Star Wars one you had up, or?
It might have been Star Wars, but I feel like I would have had a better memory for that. I'm sorry. It's
no, it's
listeners
okay.
might be able to tell that I'm a little bit sick, and my brain. I've been doing better than I expected so far, but my brain is a little bit fuzzy. So yeah, let me pull this up here. But anyway, okay, sorry. I can do that while we talk.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I've always wanted to sit down with someone who has a more serious theological background than myself, and have someone just pick through the implications as to what I'm writing. Because every once in a while, I'm like, am I writing absolute nonsense and I'm not aware of it? Because I would hate to go the screw tape route and then just write something that's mildly off, and then just keep going down that road until I'm like miles away from where I should be.
But here's the thing. You're not going to. Because, look, it's always in anything that somebody does, it's feasible that they will put that above God. They will put that above trying to have a true understanding of the Bible. That's, some stuff is more tangible, and that tends to be the stuff that we put our faith in. So, like, that happens with everybody, not just you. But if throughout you were asking, like, okay, am I deviating too much from the Bible? Am I deviating too much from the truth? If you keep asking yourself that, if you do it in the wrong way, you'll go insane. But if you do it in the right way, like, that just keeps you focused. It's that idea of walking across the water, but if you keep your eyes on Christ, then you're going to be okay. And I think that's the important thing. Is I remember when I was first in college and I was writing screenplays and stuff, and my mom, God bless her, was saying stuff like, well, what are you writing? Nice things? Like, what are you writing? And I was like, I'm writing the stuff that feels right to me. And what's more, and the more I thought about it, I thought, like, I really am trying to do the right thing by Christ in all of my life, whether it be relationships, personal behavior, and all of that. So the idea that I would just go veering off in a completely different direction when it comes to actually writing something, or in our case right now, analyzing something, it's not out of the realm of possibility, but it's also not insanely likely. Like, you are approaching film first as someone who loves film, but also as someone who is actively looking for not merely the truth with a lowercase t, but with an uppercase T, which is to say a biblical truth. Like, you are looking for that, and if it reveals itself organically, great. If it doesn't, then maybe you have to look harder, and maybe there's nothing there. But in everything that you've been talking about so far, you keep referring back to the Bible, and as long as you keep doing that, then I think you're going to be okay. Yeah, there will be moments where maybe you watch something and you regret it afterwards. Or there might be something where a few years from now you're like, oh, you know what, I probably could have been a bit more nuanced in my analysis of this or that. That's going to happen. But that's also, there's nothing unique about that in what we do. Everybody has that, So I would say, obviously, it's good to go in prayerfully, to try to think in terms of discernment, but at the same time, there's nothing that special about us. Like, yes, we're writing stuff, we're recording stuff, so we do have an audience, and some people don't. Some people, I remember a Christian math teacher once said, like, there's only so many ways you can put a Christian spin on a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And it goes, so it has to come out in other ways. But, like, everybody, in everything they do, whether it be with their career or their relationships, everybody is constantly having to ask, like, is this taking me closer to or further from God? And granted, we do have an audience, so it's like, it's not just us, it's them as well. But as long as you're sincerely trying to engage with God, the God of the Bible specifically, as opposed to like some intangible spirit, as long as you keep referring back to that, I don't think you're ever going to go too far afield. And it's, and I think I didn't mean for this to be a personal encouragement session, but so this could go for anybody listening as well. But as long as you keep doing that, regardless of what your job is, you're gonna be okay. You might make some mistakes here and there, but thankfully, there is grace. It's when we start to take that grace for granted and be like, hey, you know what, I might be doing something wrong, but hey, God still loves me, right? Once you start to take a sort of a cheap view of grace, or a casual view of grace, I think, which I do myself sometimes, I think everybody does, but once you start to rely on that so much so that you can actively do what do whatever you want, we don't sin so that grace may abound, but we do try to walk the straight and narrow path, and when we deviate, that's where grace is. And so, yeah, I think that this is sort of how I've tried to live, and like anybody else, I make plenty of mistakes, in which case I just ask for forgiveness, try to repent, and ask God to keep me a little bit more focused next time. And that's the most you can really do.
Why 120 Days of Sodom is Christianly defensible by Tyler. No.
You know what? I've never seen it. I'm curious to, and I'm sure there is something. Like, when I see a movie like Wolf of Wall Street or Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas or something like that, where you just see characters behaving in just the worst way, the question then becomes, like, all right, is the film endorsing this, or is it just showing what a hopeless life looks like, where people just they just keep raising the stakes of their own life so that they can get that pleasure, they can get that brief fulfillment, and they can define themselves in this way, but then invariably that definition goes away, and then they have to up it even more, and then you wind up with the ridiculous events of something like Salo or a Serbian film or something like that. And so to me, like, even showing characters engaging in just the worst behavior, there is still, I think, a lesson to be learned out of that. It doesn't necessarily have to be, it doesn't mean it's a lesson that I need. I didn't see Lars von Trier's Nymphomaniac, and I don't think I necessarily need to, but I'm curious, because you never know, and because I'm a film critic. And so, but I haven't made that decision yet, and I might never. As long as it's still kind of hanging in the balance there, then it's like, all right, well, if I get the feeling that I absolutely need to see it, then I'll see it. And if I get the feeling that I don't need to see it, then I won't. But as of right now, it's kind of hanging in between. So I'm erring on the side of caution and not watching it. But I did really like his Antichrist, which is such a strange name for that movie. But boy, a better depiction of grief and the loneliness of it and the isolating quality of it and just the way that it can lead to blame of yourself and of other people, and the physicalization and visualization of that grief is so horrendous, but boy, it felt right in what it was trying to do. So, you never know what God can speak to you through, and sometimes it could be speaking words of comfort. Like, as you see characters that are just going through hell, and maybe you're going through hell in that moment, it could be God saying, like, see, you're not alone. Other people have gone through this, and even though this is a fictional character, the writer may have gone through this, or is depicting something that is true, even if he or she's not experienced it. You're not alone, and that's so. While obviously I need to go back to the Bible over and over again. Like, the more I do, again, in my line of work, the more I do, the more I feel like God is saying, like, all right, obviously be careful, be discerning, but be open at the same time.
All right. I mean, I've already taken about an hour of your time, but I wanted to give you a couple minutes to talk about the documentary you talked.
Oh, sure.
So, what is this documentary I've been hearing you talk all about?
Oh, all right.
I mean, I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know the details. I'm sorry.
That's fine. So there is a streaming service called Faith Life TV, and I worked with them a year ago, and I made a little 9-part series called Faith and Filmmaking, in which case I did sort of just these short videos. Two of them were about film history, and then I interviewed some people, and one was about the auteur theory, one was about genre theory, and I really enjoyed it. And I had an idea for like a feature-length sort of video essay style documentary, and so I pitched it to them, and they really liked the idea of it, and so I made it went through several titles, and then we landed on Real Redemption, REEL, Real Redemption: The Rise of Christian Cinema, and it is, again, it's pretty much a video essay narrated by me that goes through the history of the church's relationship to Hollywood, culminating in the emergence of Christian film, and the way that has evolved in the last 20 years, the way Hollywood has responded to that, and all of that sort of thing. So I'm actually pretty proud of it, and it's not perfect. Like, I definitely see budget constraints, and I definitely see time constraints and all that sort of thing, but by and large, it's what I wanted it to be, and I think it can be very informative and it's made primarily for a Christian audience. We're sending it out to critics, and many of whom are just like secular critics who already know a lot of the stuff that's in there. It's like, I don't think they're gonna like it, because to them this is just like the most rudimentary film history. But yeah, so That's going to be available in February on Faith Life TV, the platform. Faith and Filmmaking is still available there as well. But yeah, I think it could be a good. I sort of made it as I give lectures at film festivals. I have gone to the International Christian Film Festival a few years in a row. I went to the Hollywood Divine Film Festival this year. And just in talking to like Christian filmmakers and Christian film fans, there's a genuine desire to engage with film. But to go back to the conversation we had, the topic from the beginning of this conversation, a lot of them just don't really know how. And I don't say that in a scornful way, but like they weren't raised with movies. But they have come to see the value of movies, not merely as a ministry tool, but just a general tool of like emotional engagement with the audience. And so they want to learn more about movies, but they really don't have a starting point. And so I see this film as sort of being that. It's a good way to it's a little 85-minute primer on Hollywood and the church and film, and like where those two can meet in the middle and where they don't. There's a long section about Last Temptation of Christ in there, showing different reactions, positive and negative. So so that's going to be available at Faith Life TV. I don't know what date in in February. I was way off there. February is when it's going to be, and I don't know the specific date, so just be on the lookout for that. And then you can also go to my Christian website, morethanonelesson.com, where there are articles, and then there's my personal podcast. The most recent episode was about Joker, but I've also done episodes about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood and Uncut Gems, which I loved. I think I'll be doing one about The Irishman soon. But and then you can check out Battleship Pretension, which has been running for almost 13 years now, and we just recorded episode 670, so there's a lot to listen to there as well. So that should cover everything.
All right, people have their homework laid out for them, but I'll definitely look into that documentary when it comes out, because it sounds really good. So,
thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
God bless.